Eternal Extravaganza Satellite. We have me, Brad Bonin, and Kevin Jones doing coverage today. Hopefully we'll see some great Legacy matches.
So this is a 2.5K purse satellite event for Eternal Extravaganza, brought to you by Bearded Dragon Games in Bernardsville, New Jersey. And the format today is Legacy, so we'll be seeing the full gamut of the Legacy metagame. Legacy is really, as a format, is one where people basically play what they own.
Yeah.
So whereas with a standard event like an Open or something like that, or even something like Modern, you would see a lot of people changing to reflect metagame trends, whereas Legacy is much more localized in that people play what's theirs. You know, their jam is their jam, if you will.
The format rewards you much more for mastery of a specific archetype, so whether Elves is good or bad in a given week, players who own Elves will gem Elves, and often they'll do well against the odds. Same goes for decks like Miracles and Storm, right? If you're able to play around specific difficulties, you get rewarded much more for doing that than just showing up with the right Thorn of Amethyst deck like you would in Vintage.
Well, there's also a huge ceiling regarding, you know, prices and card availability issues in Legacy, especially when you get to a local level. And here we're like starting to make the bridge between a local event and a huge event.
Yeah.
Like we're right at the cusp. So in that regard, you're seeing a lot of people who are very good and very competitive, but have been playing the same thing for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think our early feature matches, and ultimately, as the cream rises to the top, our late round feature matches will reflect those things as well.
Yeah.
So we'll be seeing a lot of the top
a lot of the
tier of Legacy,
standbys,
which is basically Miracles, Death and Taxes, various Wills of Sultai,
Delver
Grixis
decks.
Delver, Elves to a lesser extent, kind of on the downswing right now. And then the unfair decks, like Sneak and Show, Storm, Reanimator, if you will.
Some Painter, maybe.
Maybe. And then Eldrazi, which is like the closest thing to like a stacks type prison
it's
deck
like the prison
that
gatekeeper
the format
deck.
can see.
Yeah.
So we'll have round 1 feature matches coming up very shortly, and we'll be updating the event on Twitter throughout the day, so people can follow along there.
Yeah.
And it's twitch.tv/beardeddragon or /Tales of Adventure. To follow along for sure. And, do we have our round 1 matches? We can go into that, right?
Yeah. So we know that our main feature is going to be Luis Fada up against Michael Mapson, and we believe that that's going to be Death and Taxes versus Painter.
Painter. Yep.
Do we know what colors of Painter he's on? Do we know if he's on an Intuition package?
It's usually red-white, I believe.
Do we know if he's on any?
We'll have deck lists in just a second, but as far as the players go, Luis Fada is a Westchester County area native, so just north of New York City, and he plays a lot locally at Undiscovered Realm, which is a store I used to play a lot at. And Mapson is a judge, I believe he's an L2, from the Philadelphia area, and actually just finished in the top 4 of the Team Open, SCG Open last weekend in Baltimore.
Yeah.
He was playing, I believe, Naya Company in Modern.
They got slain by the Matt Nass squad that eventually won,
by the Super Ringer Monster
the 3
squad,
Plat
if you will.
Pros team.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, so we're going to see those guys, and our backup will be Josh Taylor, who had an New Jersey Invitational top 8, and Joseph Hunt, who I don't know, unfortunately, but we will learn a lot about shortly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that'll be our backup, and Luis Fada and Michael Mapson will be our main, and we'll be coming down with that shortly.
Yeah, and that'll be a relatively interesting matchup because not everyone's super familiar with how Painter works. Obviously, it's a 2-card combo revolving around Painter Servant, which lets you make all cards in a deck a specific color, and Grindstone, which mills 2 cards and checks if they're the same color, and if they are, which they always will be under Painter, you mill them again.
Well, Brad, that's a lovely piece of information, but you know what?
We have some magic?
Not on Painter.
Oh.
He's on True Name.
He's on something closer to what Reed Duke's GP list was.
Reed's True Name deck, if you will. So Reed Duke won GP Louisville with a deck very similar to this one, and then Sam Party played Legacy for the Legacy portion of the Team Constructed event with a deck very similar to this one, and they both won their respective events.
Reed actually ran the deck back and slaughtered me in round 8 of the event. Leovold and Jace, quite good when your hands full of Ponders.
We're going to go down to the match now. So we've got True Name Sultai against Death and Taxes. Luis Fada on Death and Taxes versus Michael Mapson on True Name Sultai.
How many other friends we give you a second?
All right.
Well, I haven't taken it out.
We'll be down to the match shortly.
I like how we've got some really long plaids, and I have some really short plaids.
So it looks
Oh,
like we have
we
some,
got magic.
We have some magic going on right now. It looks like the true name player, Michael, has cast the Thoughtseize and is currently just evaluating the Death and Taxes player's hand. So it looks like we have him on hand 6. We don't know, unless there's a card under that. Looks like his hand.
Yeah, 6 cards.
Yeah, right.
Caracas, Cavern, Revoker, Flickerless, Batterskull.
And I think the Mother Runes is a reasonable take there because the hand has more than 1 drop. So it's quite unfortunate that the Thoughtseize player was on the board.
You can see Napson started off on Verdant into Underground Sea, Thoughtseize. It's important to note that True Name Sultai is very mana hungry, as it has several early black spells as well as multiple double blue spells and triple colored spells throughout the course of the game.
It looks like the Death and Taxes player picked up a basic plains for the turn, so he still doesn't have any 2-drops to jam, so he let on Caracas just in case, because it's his land he'd like to have wastelanded in the case that he draws a port or a wasteland later.
Well, Lewis doesn't have much action going, so he would ideally, if he gets wastelanded here, it just prolongs the game by like a turn, which is good for someone who doesn't have anything to do anyway. And between Vial and Revoker, there's a high density of 1-mana spells in Lewis's deck. Or sorry, not Revoker, Mother. Rather. But between the 8 1-drops, there's a high density of 1-drops, so he can always still play the basic planes and a 1-drop and kind of steal back the play from Michael.
Yeah, and he doesn't know that his opponent doesn't necessarily have Delver of Secrets, but he also may just be trying to incentivize the opponent to not jam a Delver into a possible Swords.
I think it's reasonable for Verdant Catacombs to signal no Delver.
Okay. I can get behind that. I mean, this second Thoughtseize definitely shows that something's up. Relatively different than a normal
between
Delver
basic
shell.
Island, Verdant Catacombs, and 2 Thoughtseizes. He's pretty safe to assume no Delver, but that doesn't necessarily assume no Days in this day and age, because the new breed of Sultai that's been championed by Reed, Sam Party, and the like is plays 8 mana creatures and 3 copies of Days.
Yeah, because Days very often just catches people off guard in a build like that.
Well, the opportunity cost of Days we're seeing is the returning of a land, the alternate cost, if you will. So because to mitigate that, playing 8 mana creatures allows you to still have the on curve amount of mana per turn.
So it's interesting that you noted that, because the Death and Taxes player had the opportunity to play Cavern on something like Horror to play around the Days, and instead he just jammed the Revoker right into it. No word on what he's named. But it's likely one of the 2 Planeswalkers that he'll be expecting, either a Liliana or a Jace.
We see Michael has a true name, and he has it off the Wasteland, so it's possible he could have Wastelanded Lewis earlier, but recognized that his mana development with the information provided by Thoughtseize was more important. And it's likely correct. Also, he knows that true name is really tough for Death and Taxes to beat.
Yes. There's nothing like a Maydek Terminus or anything like that, so it's extremely difficult to deal with short of Council's Judgment. And when you've already Thoughtseize twice and you see your opponent hasn't had
another
one,
true name to follow up, so this is
not
somewhat of
great.
an academic game for Michael.
I believe his hand is 2 basic planes, a Batterskull, and an Unknown from the Death and Taxes side, which okay, the Cavern is set to humans.
The Cavern is on humans. Okay.
Perfect. And unfortunately, Batterskull does not race True Name Nemesis at all because of the way the protection works. You don't gain any life.
Well, Lewis recognized the inevitability of True Name Nemesis, and that's likely why he didn't Cavern to resolve Revoker. Also, Revoker's not very important.
Yeah, no, Revoker
I wish I knew what it named. Probably
right
named Deathrite Shaman, because you can't name lands.
Yeah.
So either Deathrite Shaman or Jace the Mind Sculptor, I think are the 2 shot in the dark names.
Yeah, so it actually looks like he has an Abrupt Decay stranded in his hand because he fetched up that Underground super early. But I mean, I think that prioritizing the double blue is probably more relevant than turning on an Abrupt Decay.
Well, he actually fetching Basic Island was the issue here, right? So that's what shut him off.
He didn't have a second fetch land.
Oh, okay, but he drew
fetched,
Basic Island.
Yeah.
Sure.
So he fetched early. Yeah, so this Batterskull's not really going to do what he would like.
It's going to be Dazed.
Yeah, which is backbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, double true name is the back is already broken. Now he's basically just jumping on it and screaming.
We also see the alternate mode on Days of actual mana.
Oh, casting it for 2, sure.
Rather than the true alternative cast of returning an island that you control to its hand.
So the main way that Death and Taxes attacks a a True Name deck is by getting Mother of Runes and equipment into play and basically going around it.
Yeah.
And making an inevitable advantage there. But as we see, the double True Name draw takes down game 1, and we're going to look at sideboards.
Yes.
So Michael's sideboard has 2 copies of Pithing Needle, 2 copies of Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Mindbreak Trap, 2 copies of Submerge, and then 7 one-ofs. Man after my own heart. I dig the 7 one-ofs. 1 Grafdigger's Cage, 1 Nile Spellbomb, 1 Dread of Night, 1 Golgari Charm, 1 Umezawa's Jitte, to go with a main deck Umezawa's Jitte, 1 Painful Truce, 1 Thoughtseize, and 2 Submerge. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yep. And then what is Lewis
so
have going on?
Lewis has 3 Rest in Peace, 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar, 2 Path to Exile, 2 Aethersworn Canonist, 2 Council's Judgment, a Pithing Needle, a Sword of War and Peace, and 2 Containment Priest. So certainly the Council's Judgments are coming in right away because of the way that voting skirts the way that Protection and Hexproof work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Gideon is a fantastic tool for the grindy matchups. And I mean, because he's a deck that's trying to get to the late game, he will very reliably have the 4 mana to cast it. We just saw him hard cast a Batterskull.
I think because of both Cavern and Vial, Michael will be incentivized to remove Daze from his deck.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of that, something like Gideon gets appreciably better.
Yes.
And also, I think that Gideon is generally there for like the Sultai matchups. It holds true in Modern as well. Like if you're playing against like a deck without lightning bolts, or you're likely to bring in Gideon against any mid-rangey deck without direct damage.
Yeah. Especially when the opposing deck's primary source of removal is Abrupt Decay, which does not hit converted mana cost 4
The
Gideon.
Abrupt Decay, Fatal Push suite, while powerful against the early game from many decks in the format, is notably weak to something like Reality Smasher or Gideon Ally of Zendikar.
The same way that it's weak to Jace.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Miracles usually prioritizes Jace against Sultai for the same reason. As you can see, Jace is one of the best cards against Sultai decks.
Do you bring in Rest in Peace to try to turn off the Deathrite, or I think that's potentially too aggressive, but it's...
I initially assumed Tarmogoyf because you see Sultai and you assume Tarmogoyf, but we look at the actual list and we have 8 mana creatures and 6 3-drops.
Yeah.
And no Tarmogoyfs. So, now keep in mind, Lewis doesn't know that.
Yeah.
He does see Deathrite Shaman, and it's possible he could worry about something like Gurmag Angler or Murderous Cut.
Well, I don't know if he didn't see a Deathrite that game either. He just got Thoughtseize. The only cards he saw were Thoughtseize, Ponder, and Wastelands.
If you see True Name...
of course, yeah. But so he may not actually know his opponent has Noble Hierarch. Because...
Yeah, he might not know that. I think he can assume Deathrite Shaman, and that's totally justifiable, but... I think he also can assume Tarmogoyf with some inference of reasonable...
With some confidence. So we may see him bring in the Rest in Peace, but it looks like he only boarded in 3 or 4 cards.
From Lewis's perspective, I would bring in the 2 Gideons, the 2 Council Judgments, and War and Peace does not give protection from True Name, so I would probably just go there. I saw a basic island, so I'm hesitant to bring in Path, especially when it doesn't really... It's like you actually don't have enough swords to take out, right? Like you're probably going to trim on swords in this matchup.
I'm probably cutting 2 of the 4 swords. I might leave in 1 or 2 just in case, because you do... Depending on whether you put him on Goyf or Leovold, you do still want to answer whatever threat isn't functionally hexproof.
I would likely cut the Prelate.
Yeah, I think the Sarah Avengers are also potentially cuttable, because unless you're vialing them in, they're likely outclassed on the board.
I'd trim Revokers because you might just put your swords on Deathrite Shamans and there's not much else to do with them.
But it depends on if he knows how close to the read list he is, because Revoker on Jace is a house.
Yeah, for sure. But then again, there's also something like Toxic Deluge that you could worry about.
Yeah, of course.
And speaking of that, I think Michael will be bringing in the copy of Golgari Charm, the copy of Dread of Night, quite obviously, and likely his copies of Pithing Needle and a supplementary Umezawa's Jitte.
Yes, because there are a lot of X1s to gun down, and obviously Needle is a nice reactive answer to Aether Vial.
And he'll be trimming on Dazes for sure, and possibly on Forces. It's important to neutralize Vial, but you also need somewhere to put all your Abrupt Decays.
And especially on the draw, I think that he's definitely been
he's
trimming
leaving,
on the Dazes.
He's leaving at least 3 Forces in on the draw.
Yeah.
But he'll be trimming on Dazes for sure. And here we've got the 7-card hands being drawn.
So hopefully both players can keep.
It looks like Lewis already mulliganed to 6.
No,
there we go.
He's just drawing his hands
likes
slowly.
to slow roll himself. I don't blame you. I always scratch off lottery tickets really slow too. I feel you.
I like to do the 4 then 3.
Yeah, I always do 4 down, 3 down, and then I look at them in a group of 4 and 3,
Right,
and
so
I'm like, I really need a land in these last 3.
Yeah, it looks like we have a Dread of Night in that opening hand along with sufficient.